before you take your seat, if you can please raise your right hand, and the clerk will swear you in. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Bottle of water back there. Thank you very much.
Sir, could you please state your name and spell your last name for the record?
Mark William Kroll, K-R-O-L-L.
And, sir, could you just introduce yourself to the jury and just give us an explanation of what type of work you do?
I'm a biomedical scientist with a primary specialty in bioelectricity. And bioelectricity is the study of the interaction of electricity in the human body. So I do research and publications in using electricity for therapeutic purposes, such as electrical treatments for solid cancer tumors, shocks to restart the heart, and what's more relevant in this case, the use of electronics to control the human body either through pain or through electronic muscle contractions.
Now, sir, some of the next question you may have already touched on, but what specific fields have you worked in over the years?
I started out while I was a student working in electrical stimulation of the bladder when I worked at Medtronic for people that could not urinate with voluntary control, and I worked in pacemakers. Then I ended up spending about 15 years working on improving implantable defibrillators. I also was involved in the startup of making a simple single button external defibrillators for law enforcement and firefighters. And about 20 years ago, I got involved with the TASER electrical weapons manufacturer. So I've done a lot of research in that area. And I am still active in electrical treatments for cancer.
Do you have any teaching roles?
I presently am an adjunct full professor of biomedical engineering at the University of Minnesota. Before that, I was adjunct full professor of biomedical engineering at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. And overlapping that somewhat, I was a faculty member for the Creativity and Innovation program at UCLA.
Sit on any boards or committees
Yes.
in relation to your work? Maybe there's others, but just in relation to your work.
Well, I sat on the Axon board, a company formerly known as TASER that makes the electrical weapons and the body cameras, for 21 years. I just got off of that about exactly 1 year ago. And I also sat on their scientific medical advisory board. I sit on the board of a company in Boston called Hemonetics that makes plasma extraction machines. If you've ever sold plasma, $75, or ever used a plasma-derived drug for a bleeding disorder, for example, that went through our equipment, most likely. I sit on the board of the committee for ANSI, the American National Standards Institute, that sets safety standards for things like bicycle helmets and safety glasses. They have a standard naturally for electrical weapons. So I sit on that committee. Those standard make sure you put out enough juice so you get the muscle contraction and not so much that you would be real dangerous. There's a couple others that those aren't maybe as relevant.
Sure. And have you advised any well-known agencies or companies?
Yeah, I do.
I'll stipulate to his qualifications as an expert. I've read everything, so I think I'll stipulate to him electrical weapons, if that's what we're looking for.
It is getting to be that time of day, Dr. Kroll, and you have quite a bit of experience here. But if maybe I could just flush out a couple of topics, and I can maybe cut to it a little bit more here. Do you advise any governmental agencies?
I'm a regular advisor to the United States Department of Justice on electrical weapons, and that includes Border Patrol, United States Marshals, and the Department of Justice Public Defender Program, and I've advised the United States Navy how to defend their ships from scuba diving terrorists, things like that.
Now, I don't want to age you, but how long have you been working in biomedical research? What year approximately did you get started in this?
1970.
Okay. Now, just your formal education. Can you just tell us post-high school education?
I have a bachelor's degree in mathematics. And while I was in high school, I spent a summer at Michigan State, which I'm very proud of, studying mathematics.
You just flew in from another state,
That's
right?
Yes.
This morning?
Yeah, that was 6 weeks, best 6 weeks of my life. And then I got a master's in PhD electrical engineering from the University of Minnesota, and I have an MBA from St. Thomas University.
I'm just going through here as far as in the last 20 years or so. You mentioned Axon. Have you had several adjunct faculty positions over the years?
Yes, Cal Poly and University of Minnesota and UCLA.
Can you share with us any major awards you have earned?
The one I'm most proud of, in 2010, I was given the International Career Achievement Award in Biomedical Engineering.
And have you been recognized in the field of medicine for your biomedical contributions?
Yes, the American College of Cardiology awarded me the fellow status, and having to do with my work in shocks in the heart, Heart Rhythm Society gave me the fellow status, and the American Institute of Medicine and Biology and Engineering, which is part of the National Science Agency, whatever, it was the National Science Program that was set up by Abraham Lincoln. I got fellow accreditation there, and then on the international side, Engineering and Medicine and Biology Society, I have a fellow status with them.
Just generic, where are most of your lectures? Where do you do most of your lecturing?
I've lectured in 44 states, 38 countries, and locally I've lectured at Spectrum several times when they were setting up a program to use a new advanced implantable defibrillator on how to properly set that up and the science behind it.
I'm not going to ask you all the different countries, but you've also done some lecturing internationally. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
One topic here, publications. I think it's important to touch on. But did you write a book in particular relevant to TASER-related cases?
I'm a co-editor of 2 books on electrical weapons. First was TASER, Conductive Electrical Weapons, something like Science, Medicine, and Law, or something like that. Another one was Atlas of Conductive Electrical Weapon Wounds and Forensic Analysis, something like that.
Okay. And I'm going to ask you just a few more questions to give some context to your testimony here, but just to move on. Your Honor, at this time I would respectfully offer Dr. Mark Kroll as an expert in the field of operations and effects of electrical weapons, including benefits, risks, and myths.
No objection.
Now,
So, the expert in operation and effects of electrical weapons, and what was the other part?
including benefits,
I'll just leave it at, I'll consider him an expert in the field of operation and effects of electrical weapons. That includes whatever it includes.
that's great, Your Honor. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Just one topic here. Since you're a PhD doctor and biomedical scientist, can you just help us understand the difference between a doctor specializing in biomedical sciences and a doctor that specializes in MD or a medical doctor?
There are 3 primary differences. Number 1, we never touch patients. We're not licensed, that's not our training, versus healthcare providers, whether it's a physician, chiropractor, dentist, nurse, EMT, they have training and licensing in touching patients. Number two, we work on research that hopefully helps thousands, if not millions, of patients. And I'm very proud of the fact that over 2 million patients have had my patents in their chest with improved implantable defibrillators, whereas a physician will typically deal with one patient at a time. And the third difference is our main job is to give the science to the physician, and the physician gives advice to the patient. So they're very different roles, but they're tightly intertwined.
How about forensic, let's see. Have you authored any papers published in forensic medicine journals?
Yes, I published about 40 articles in forensic medicine journals.
Okay. Just on the topic of, Dr. Kroll, are the effects of restraint considered a specialty area of medicine?
No. What's taught in medicine for restraint is someone's on their back with wrists cuffed to the bed and ankles cuffed to the bed, and they're taught that those restraints have to be tight enough so the person can't fall off the bed, but not so tight that you cut off the circulation or do nerve damage.
Dr. Kroll, what are the effects of electricity on the human body, electrical shock, or electrical injury considered a are those a specialty area of medicine?
No, those are a scientific specialty. American medical schools only teach 3 sentences about the effects of electricity on the human body. They learn a lot of things, thousands of diseases and hundreds of drugs, 1,000 parts of the body. So they don't really have time to get into that. So that remains a scientific specialty.
Now, I'm going to try to move forward now, unless there's anything particularly relevant background-wise. We can always bring it up at any point, too, along the testimony here, sir. But you've been provided several materials on this case and then created a report with some of your opinions related to this case.
Yes.
And let's just start. Obviously, this is a case that involves a TASER, CEW, I think, at least that's what they referred to it as before. But what is your assessment, or how do you get started by evaluating something like this?
Pretty much looked at what everyone else looked at. I looked at the videos, the reports, the downloads from the weapon. Of course, I read Brian Child's report because he does the most detailed analysis of what was found inside the memory of the weapon.
And do you have any relevant publications that are associated with topics involved in this case?
Besides the 2 books, I've written chapters on electrical weapons for forensic pathology textbooks, and I have published about 100 papers total. That includes 50 formal papers on the use of force, electrical weapons, arrest-related death, and many abstracts and book chapters.
Now, in particular, have you written on topics involved in this case here as far as specific experience of firearm transition after a loss of a conductive electronic weapon or a TASER?
Yes. Sadly, what happened here happens every month or 2 across the country, because TASER electrical weapons are used about 2,000 times a day worldwide, about 1,500 times a day in the United States. It doesn't always end well. It doesn't always do the job. And then so there's a transition to firearm. And over a 20-year period, there have been over 1,000 deaths where the TASER electrical weapon failed to control the situation and the officer moved to lethal force. Of those, we've looked at the very particular issue of the suspect taking control or attempting to take control of the officer's weapon. And as of 2020, there were 113 such cases. And there were 53 of those cases, the officer then transitioned to the firearm and shot the subject. 48 ended in a fatality. 5 led to non-fatal wounds. And that was published in 2021 in a Journal of Forensic and Legal Medicine, I believe.
Is that peer reviewed?
That's absolutely peer-reviewed journal, yes.
And what's the difference between a peer reviewed article versus writing books or magazines?
I get asked to write articles for magazines in this area, police magazines, for example, and you send it in. If they like the story, they might edit a little bit, slick it up, add some nice artwork. But for a scientific publication, the rules are different. I submit the article to the journal, then the journal editor takes a first look at it. Does it fit for this journal? And if it does fit for the journal, does it appear to be of high scientific quality? If not, it gets sent back. If it passes those first two gates, then the editor-in-chief will send it out to 2 to 4 anonymous experts in this area. So that's the peer review. And these are people, they may be my friends, they may be people that aren't my friends, but they are experts in the area. And then my name is taken off the article, and my co-authors' names are taken off the article. It gets sent out to them as an anonymous paper. And then they score it like homework. They say, this is really dumb, this is really great, or this is really fine except for page 3, sentence 7, doesn't make sense, or the conclusions are stronger than the statistics that were used. And then they grade it A through F like homework, they send it back to the editor, and then the editor comes back and tells me, I'm sorry, your paper's rejected. Or I'll accept it if you make all of these changes that the reviewers want. And then you send it back in with those changes, hopefully it gets accepted. Sometimes it's accepted on that second pass. I've had articles that went through 5 rounds of reviews before it's accepted. And once it's considered, once it is accepted, forgive me, by a peer-reviewed journal, then it's considered part of the scientific literature.
Now, in addition to writing and researching a peer-reviewed article on this topic, have you also been called in to testify in cases, those types of situations, as far as officer losing the TASER device and having to resort to, or some type of shooting resulting?
Yes, I have testified in at least 2 other similar tragic situations like this that resulted in loss of control of the electrical weapon and a fatal shooting. That comes to mind right now, one out of Georgia, one out of South Carolina, and I'm blanking on the other one right now, but there's 2 that come to mind, and there may be some others.
Okay. I'm going to get into just, we've heard from Brian Childs, who obviously is well-versed on the science behind the device and analysis. We've also heard from a master TASER instructor, so I'm not planning to unfold the device all over again, okay? So we'll probably cut to some particular topics. But in your review of the materials on this case, did you also have the opportunity to review an expert report by the prosecution's expert, Mr. Stoughton and Bloomfield?
Yes.
And did you have the opportunity to listen to the testimony of Mr. Stoughton earlier this week?
I did.
And did you follow, upon your review of the expert report and then the testimony that you heard, did you go to explore and see whether there was any published research or writings that may be relevant to what they wrote about and talked about, and perhaps their expertise in those areas?
But yes, and even goes back when I first read Professor Stoughton's report, which was probably in January. I'd never heard of him before, and I've been working in this area for a long time, so I wasn't sure where he got his understanding of electrical weapons, and I went through his CV, and it didn't mention any training or publications or research in this area, which is fine. There's lots of different things people work on. And then when I saw the testimony, which also included some things that to be kind, I would say things that I disagreed with. I contacted Axon, who keeps records of everyone that's ever got any kind of a training certificate on their products. See if they'd ever heard of him. They hadn't, and they had no records of him ever having any kind of training certificate of any sort. They have no records.
Jack, he never said he had a training certificate. He was a police officer and use of force expert. That he didn't claim to be a taser expert, so I'm not quite sure what this relevance is.
I think we can, so you, I think it's relevant as far as they heard testimony, and he went and explored what the experts claimed expertise was.
The expert was the use of force and police tactics. He never had as a taser expert.
I think he tried to put himself out as an expert in as much as he could.
So, I mean, I think it's hearsay, so I'll sustain the objection to the extent that it does contain hearsay, and he was not recognized as a taser expert or in that area, so Mr. Stoughton wasn't.
Just in general, based upon your research, you know, within your communities, was there really much that you were able to find that would give Mr. Stoughton expertise to be testifying the way that he
Yeah, but
did?
Jack, you just rephrased the question. It's the same question, so I don't understand how it's relevant.
No, you didn't quite finish it, but can you finish that question so I can move on that?
Sure, and I'm basically asking, you know, any literature or anything else that he could find in this world that he's in that would lend credence to whether or not Mr. Stoughton's testimony may have been accurate on several topics about the taser.
Okay, so, again, I'll sustain the objection because Mr. Stoughton didn't testify in the area of expertise that this witness has, which is in the, I wrote it down, operation and effects of electrical weapons. Mr. Stoughton didn't testify about that.
He testified to a lot of things about the taser. But I can,
Not as an expert, so,
well, he was up there on a witness stand as an expert.
right, but not tasers, or not in the area
Okay.
that this witness is an expert in.
All right.
Just to vote on that then?
We could move along then perhaps, but did you have take some issue with some of the testimony that you heard from Mr. Stoughton on the taser?
Yes, some things were incorrect.
Okay. Now, just moving to some topics here in this case, did you have the opportunity to listen to Mr. Bloomfield talk about incapacitation and neuromuscular incapacitation?
I did.
And are they the same?
No.
Can you explain that? Let me just rephrase that. Incapacitation, neuromuscular incapacitation, are they the same thing?
No. Neuromuscular incapacitation is one type of incapacitation. There are several others.
And I think we've heard discussion. Can you just explain a little bit as far as, although I hate to do it all over again, but neuromuscular incapacitation, can you give us just a brief survey of what that is?
If you have, say, probes, especially in your back, and the pulses are going into your body, those are stimulating nerves in your back, so your back muscles tense up. If the top probe is high enough, it'll stimulate the nerves that control the arms. You'll lose control of your arms. And then if the bottom probe is low enough, it will stimulate the femoral nerve, which controls mostly the thigh muscles, and the sciatic nerve, which controls the lower leg, and the perineal nerve, which controls most of the feet muscles. And so a person will lose effective control of all of their skeletal muscles. They fall down and they can't really do much. That's neuromuscular. It's the nerves that control the muscles that are being stimulated. But you can imagine that if you had somebody duct tape from shoulder to ankle, they're also incapacitated, but it does not involve the nerves, doesn't really involve the muscles. So it's really dangerous to assume that because you don't have neuromuscular incapacitation, there's no incapacitation possible. You have to keep those separate.
Now, I'd just like to ask you about one type of potential incapacitation, and you can explain it a lot better than myself, but could you explain the carotid variety of incapacitation to us? Carotid, I'm sorry.
If any of you ever did judo or you watched a judo match, there is a hold in which you put your arm like this with the elbow right in front so you're not damaging the sensitive tracheal area. And then the sides of your forearm and your bicep are squeezing right here. And these are pressure sensors that are designed into our body to control the amount of blood going to the brain. So when I stand up, these pressure sensors say, hey, I'm not getting enough blood. Tells the heart, crank it up, so you don't faint when you stand up. If you lay down, then those pressure sensors say, hey, I got plenty of blood, back off. I don't want to blow up the brain. And somebody can be hung upside down for a long time, and eventually they will die from lots of other problems with breathing. And these carotid baroreceptors, think like barometric pressure, that's what it is, they're just pressure sensors, telling the heart, back it off, back it off, back it off. You can also do that electrically. In fact, there is a device for people with really bad blood pressure that's essentially a pacemaker that just tickles these two nerves around here, and that sends the signals down to the heart, back it off, we got too much blood pressure. It's for people for which blood pressure pills don't work. And so that would be a way you could incapacitate somebody. Well, in judo, you pinch this off, they faint, and they're out for a while. You got electrically. Do you want more detail on that?
No, I may just approach you if I could with a photo here.
Okay, that's perfect.
And maybe, do you recognize this photograph, and could that help explain this concept?
Yes, please.
All right, Your Honor, I would like to publish and admit Defense Exhibit V. V is in Victor.
Objection.
Okay, the V is not admitted.
And while we're at it, Your Honor, there's a second page to V, part of this explanation as well. Do you understand that photograph, sir?
I do.
That's also, both photos are part of V, Your Honor.
Okay, and you saw that too, Mr. Becker, you don't have any objection?
Correct.
Okay, so V is admitted, the two pages.
Maybe I should have done this before, but does that help assist in your explanation there?
Yes, so we start with the carotid artery, which comes off of your aorta, which takes the blood directly from your heart. And here we see the right carotid. And just before the split into the two carotids that go on the right side of your head, there's a pressure sensor, like pressure gauge on your car that tells you the tire inflation is low. And if you put pressure on that, you're confusing it, and I gotta be careful, because you can make yourself faint. It's saying, hey, there's enough pressure, tell it to back off. You can faint. You can also stimulate that electrically.
Can you explain that? So for instance, the drive stun function, we've all heard quite a bit of evidence about this drive stun function. It's irregardless of the probes and the cartridges, the TASER has a drive stun function, is that correct?
Yes.
And what could electricity through the drive stun function applied to that point do?
Well, that would stimulate those nerves, and that would send a signal to your brain and to your heart saying, back it off. You've got too much blood, and you would faint. And that I think I could use that next picture.
Yeah, could we go to the next picture, please? Go back. There's only one. I think that's from a... that it?
Yeah, so here's a little flashback in history. About 25 years ago, when the TASER company started, they would train this. So you could stimulate here and make somebody faint. You could incapacitate them with the drive stun. And they asked some of their physician researchers if they could study this, and they said, no, it's way too dangerous. There's too many sensitive structures in here, and you could shut the heart off for a while and it wouldn't come back. And there have been a couple of rare cases of a judo instructor in one case that died from this. He told his pupil to hold it on until he tapped out. Well, he passed out, never tapped out, and he died. So this was considered too dangerous. So this has been taught as a way of incapacitating a violent subject with the drive stun. Now, they simply say, don't go near the neck.
So these warnings that have been, that are in evidence from Axon that are then taught to the police officers as far as avoiding some of these sensitive areas, even with the drive stun, and avoiding the neck, this could be one of the risks of drive stun to the neck.
Yes, and the other one, which I believe Mr. Childs touched on, was the mechanical force in the trachea. Trachea is very sensitive. You can have permanent damage, which is why we, defensively, we drop our chin. And you could make the heart go into idle by stimulating here at the carotid baroreceptor.
Now, can there be temporary incapacitation from the drive stun in any other way?
Yes, you can have incapacitation from disorientation. If a SWAT team goes into a very high-risk entry, where there may be armed subjects in a room, they will shoot in flashbang grenades. And these come in and they have really bright lights and really loud sound, and you're completely disoriented. You don't know which way is up. There's such a sensory overload. And you're not muscularly incapacitated. You are cognitively incapacitated. You simply don't know what's up. You're disoriented, not sure where you are. You're incapable of forming the cognitive functions of fighting or resisting. And that can happen with a drive stun. If someone is not expecting it, they're sober, like a police officer on duty, they're not anesthetized or analgesied by drugs or high levels of alcohol, they would have the full sensation. And electrical shocks have a very disorienting sensation. Now, some of you have experienced shocks. You've experienced a static shock, certainly up in Michigan. And maybe you've experienced shocks from doing wiring or something like that. It doesn't last long. You pull back. The problem with electrical shocks is not the pain. It's a disorientation. Because think about what your fingers sense when you touch something. They sense vibration, they sense pressure, they sense hot, they sense cold, they sense all kinds of things. And those nerves then run up to your brain to form a sensation. If you're stimulating electrically, all of those nerves are fired, and the signal going to your brain is very confusing. Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it vibrating? Is it not? Is it pressure? I don't know what's going on. For example, when I took my TASER hit in my chest, my first sensation was I didn't know where I was. And then my next sensation was reminding me of this movie Alien, which is an old movie, I'm dating myself, where this alien was trying to kick itself out of the chest because I had all this sensation of vibration, pressure, and tension. I didn't know what was going on. I really thought somebody was trying to kick out my chest. So there's pain there, but the disorientation is a bigger factor. So if you can disorient someone with a sudden shock, they will be temporarily incapacitated as well.
In regards to the TASER, whether it's probe deployment or even a drive stun, we've had several people talking about voluntary tasings. Even I drive stun myself all the time. It's no big deal. Is there a difference between voluntary and involuntary tasings as far as for the recipient? Can there be?
Yes, and there's degrees to it. For example, a police officer getting training, that's encouraged but not required. And so it's kind of voluntary, but you've got a lot of peer pressure. And so that still is going to hurt and might have a kind of a bad memory of it. But if you just voluntarily, say, took some kind of a shock box, and you can buy gadgets that do this, if you say buy one of these six-pack muscle stimulators and crank those up, that hurts, and you crank them up, it really hurts, but you're in control. And there's a body of psychological literature that shows that when you're in control, you can handle a lot of pain, because you know you can turn it off. And since I've done a fair bit of work in electronic muscle stimulation, including therapeutic muscle stimulation, you know, I've done studies on this and have interviewed people, and one of my favorite examples is a professional hockey player. And I said, do you use one of these six-pack stimulators? He said, yeah, I use it to strengthen my core. And I said, what was the pain like? He said, well, I cranked it all the way up. It's the worst pain I ever felt in my life. And I said, well, how could you stand it? He said, because I knew I could turn it off anytime I wanted. It's a total control. So if you're in control and it's your idea, it's not so bad. Especially if you just for a stunt want to drive stun yourself in front of a class, take the weapon, zap. I've done it in court twice. Okay, it's not that big a deal. And the best example of the difference between voluntary and involuntary is tickling. I'm very ticklish, and unfortunately my wife knows this, takes advantage of it. But if I tickle myself, it's no big deal. It's voluntary, and my brain just says, this is no big deal, you're doing it, why are you doing this, it's stupid, but nothing happens. So there's a big difference between just zapping yourself and having somebody else force electric shock on you.
Now, just about to move on here, but just to go back to the two forms of temporary incapacitation you discussed, as far as the carotid baroreceptor, thank you, and also this temporary incapacitation from disorientation. Is that in drive stun mode that those two means of temporary incapacitation can happen?
Yes, those are the best ways to do it, is with a drive stun.
Okay. Now, moving on to another topic here, outside of the taser's ability to incapacitate, what is one of the other more serious injuries that you see from the taser device?
The most serious life-changing injury is what we call a globe rupture. The globe goes into the eye, and it pops the eyeball. The vitreous fluid runs out, and it collapses like a beach ball. The eye is surgically removed because it's worthless, and then you get a glass eye, and you may have a lifetime of nerve pain from the nerves in the back, depending upon how well they cut things off at the nerves. That is your greatest fear, and my colleagues and I have published 2 papers on this. There have been over 30 cases documented of this injury with people who ended up with glass eyes.
Now, are officers trained never, is this part of the reason they're trained never to target the face because of the potential eye injuries?
That is the primary reason why you never target the face.
Now, an individual without training, is it fair to say they may not be aware of those sensitive areas to avoid?
That's true, or an antagonistic person may intentionally target the face.
Are you also aware of any cases where the drive stun to the eye has caused serious damage.
Yes. You don't just have to have the probe doing the mechanical cleaning. I had wanted to show you some pictures. They're pretty dramatic of that. But there was a case published in 2007 in a Journal of Eye Surgery of a guy who had a drive stun over his right eye, and he had a lot of damage. He had iritis and glaucoma from that, and interestingly, he ended up with cataracts in his left eye, even though that's not where the drive stun was. So that those high electric fields can do a lot of damage. You've got a lot of sensitive nerves, obviously, around your eye.
Now, I'm already moving towards a conclusion here, Dr. Kroll, but we've already heard, as I mentioned, from the Axon expert, Master Taser, as far as the warnings that an officer is given on this device and the potential for NMI, avoiding certain areas. But based on your experience reviewing these types of cases and you watching the video in this case, was Officer Schurr in a proximity, a distance from the other individual, where within a split second he could have had the probes deployed on him?
Yes.
Was he within arm's length approximately proximity where in a split second the drive system could have been used upon him?
Yes.
And I'm sorry to take us off. Let's back up one moment. I didn't think of this before. When we're talking about the temporary incapacitation, as far as disorientation, could that be even more so if a person's completely fatigued and exhausted, their ability to fight that off or to avoid having some type of incapacitation?
Yes.
In this case here, where the probes, wires are spread around these two men as they struggle over that device, can those probes and wires be re-energized on the taser?
Yes.
And can that leave potential risk of NMI from those probes and possibly even the wires?
In certain circumstances, and now I'm recalling that other case, similar case was in Florida, where there was a struggle on the ground and the suspect, it was a suspected stolen car, took control of the officer's electrical weapon and kept pulling the trigger, and they had the wires wound all around between them, and the officer was getting incapacitated from sensing that shocking. And finally it took, I think it was 27 seconds, where he's able to get enough control of his right arm and pull out his firearm and tragically shoot the suspect.
Now, when we talk about the wires, the probes, the drive stun put into that equation, that can also help close the circuit and deliver potential NMI?
Yes, because I believe Mr. Childs explained this the other day, because you've got electrodes on the end of the weapon on the muzzle, and so that can complete a circuit if you have just one connection. And in this case, you've got probes in the ground, so you're putting electrical current into the ground. They're both on the ground. You could use a drive stun to complete the circuit.
In this case here, where we now know that both cartridges had been deployed, was this officer still at risk of suffering incapacitation in several different ways?
Yes.
And according to your peer-reviewed research, do officers can and do they resort to deadly force use to protect themselves in some of these situations?
Sadly, they're forced to do that about every month or two somewhere in the country.
Just one moment, please. So are you familiar with the TASER 7 device?
Yes.
Have you ever handled one before or seen it in pictures?
Yes.
If I could just show you Defendant's Exhibit L4. Do you know where the safety mechanism is on that device?
Yes.
And does it appear as though, can you tell whether or not the safety is on or off?
Well, the safety is off, meaning the weapon is on, because we see the red right there.
Okay.
So this weapon was fully enabled, it was turned on.
It was fully enabled and ready to do what to potentially re-energize it, if you recall?
You could pull the trigger to re-energize it, or you could push the side button to energize it.
Okay. Your Honor, just for the record, Defendant's Exhibit L4, this is a photograph, I believe admitted through Detective Tubergen, of photographs taken at the scene after this incident. Just a moment, please. Nothing else. Thank you.
Sir, I'm gonna go, kind of go through, you've been around the TASER for a long time, the fair statement?
21 years, yes, sir.
21 years. Because I'm going back, I'm looking, starting off, and maybe a starting point would be May 2011. There's a National Institute of Justice report, kind of the Department of Justice put a report on the TASER, correct?
They've done several.
But that was like the first one, if you will, the kind of the big one, kind of coming out.
They sponsored the McDonald study, which was published in 2009. It looked at 24,000 uses of force, including the TASER. But if you refresh, you go for the name.
Would you,
They
I mean,
sponsored a
if
lot
would
of
you,
research.
I do have it for you, if it would
Sure.
help you take a look at it.
Sure.
Got some of my tabs on it.
Thank you.
Sure.
And that is,
It's a National Justice Institute report from the Department of Justice. That's a public, is that where it's from?
Yes.
you said from 2011.
Correct.
This is, okay, yeah, this looks like one of their publications.
Yeah.
They've actually done a lot.
And I'm not gonna try and get into a whole lot, but the
Sure.
general gist of the report was that the CEW conducted
Electrical weapon.
conductor electrical weapon can significantly reduce injuries to suspects, and the use of CEDs, conducted electrical devices, can decrease injuries to officers and civilians. That was the gist of the report.
Yes, that's why officers carry them.
Sure. And this, then, you kind of did maybe your own follow-up, if you will, because this is I have a field statistics overview from 2000. You can look at it, 2000.
At 2008, that's a book chapter.
It's a book chapter?
Yes, yes.
So it's a chapter, you did a book from that.
Yes, sir.
So we heard about it, so you get asked to do something in a book, you did a chapter on that, this is your own writing.
That's correct. In fact, this is my first book.
Okay,
So, yeah.
the first one. And in that thing, your own research concludes that 1.4 million humans have received a CEW exposure as of July 2008. Do you
That
remember
sounds
writing
right.
that? The adoption of these devices has demonstrated a reduction in both officer and suspect injuries, rarely a link between CEW exposure and death. That's what you wrote, right?
I'll take it, but
I mean, you want to
Yeah.
look at it, I mean, that's like, they write it down.
I assume you're reading it correctly.
Okay.
Yep. They usually work fine, and that officers use them.
Yep. Going back, and you further work, going back to 1983, including cases where TASER was listed as a cause of death, there were 12. 12 cases out of 1.4 million. That was in the early days, if you will.
What's the question?
That's what you wrote in there. There was
Okay.
12 deaths out of 1.4 million.
Okay.
If you want to.
No, I know, that's,
Okay.
deaths are uncommon.
Okay, and that's what I'm trying to go through here. Kind of like this next one, 2015, baseball poison and soup recipes. That article you wrote?
Yeah, it's not peer reviewed, that's an informal article on ResearchGate.
But it's your article, right?
Yes,
And in that article, I mean, if you need to look at it, I'll give it to you as well. Just to, I'm gonna go over.
Oh, and that's different. This one's not the soup recipe. This was a peer-reviewed article in the European Journal of Defense and Safety. Yes?
Is that not the one that he just named? So
No.
it's talking about something different.
No, but I'm familiar with both.
It's your article. That's, you know, you wrote it.
I'm one of 6 authors there. I'm the first author. I'm happy to take responsibility for it.
Okay. In that, it says the CEW looks somewhat like a pistol and is occasionally mislabeled as a stun gun, so the non-specialists make a subconscious connection and thus form the misplaced intuition that every time a trigger is pulled, something powerful is launched. That's what's in there.
Okay.
You wrote that. You remember that, or do you trust it?
I'll take your word for it.
Okay. The highly effective rate also gives the impression that the device must be extremely powerful. It is not. Just very optimized to do its job with minimal power. You remember writing that?
Sounds right.
Now, I also have, this is not an article. You're doing a PowerPoint for medical examiners?
I've done a few. Thank you.
Standing behind you.
Yep. Oh, I remember this.
Identify what you're handing to the witness. Just
It's not an exhibit, just this is a PowerPoint. It says a PowerPoint medical examiner collection of comprehensive objective medical evidence for conducted electrical weapons and their temporal relationship to sudden arrest.
Now I
Okay.
see why you didn't.
I'm a third author on this, but so I remember this.
Okay, but this is something I got as a PowerPoint. Is it something you presented, or?
I didn't. I think my colleague presented this at a conference in London.
Okay. Well, one of the things to talk about in this PowerPoint, the pain contribute, good grief, I can't talk. The pain contribution speculation. The CEW allegedly causes great pain, and this led to increased caliomines. How do you say that? Maybe you can help me out.
Okay, thank you. Catecholamines.
Catecholamines.
Those are the hyperhormones, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine.
Okay, which cause death. The next line is, there have been 1.9 million CEW training applications, all painful, and there have been no deaths. That's what's in here, right?
I take your word for it.
If you
That
want-
sounds true. No, that sounds correct.
I'm just trying to,
I mean, officers get training applications, and if they don't die, they wouldn't be doing training applications anymore. They have somebody hold them up on each
Sure.
side, they get it, and they go down.
and this was, at this point in time, there's about 4.6 million human CEW exposures at about the time this PowerPoint was done,
That
correct?
sounds all right. It's up to about 7 million now in the field and 2 million training exposures.
It looks like I have another,
And I should stress that those applications are all done by certified trainers, of course, so they know where to do the probes and have somebody, 2 spotters, in fact.
this appears to be maybe another book chapter, if you will, from 2018. Guidelines for investigating officer-involved shootings, arrest-related deaths, and deaths in custody.
Yes?
You recognize that? It looks like you may have done a chapter
Yes.
with Michael Brave. Okay, you recognize that? In this, you write, CEW delivers enormous currents, but a mild current causing only moderate motor nerve-mediated muscle contractions. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
The strength of muscle contractions is less than half of what someone would voluntarily do during recreational weightlifting.
That's correct.
One of the myths, you talk about a myth in this, a delayed recovery. There's a delayed recovery after TASER exposure. With zero evidence, people are left days and week, at least for 5, perhaps 15 minutes, or that someone would be rendered physically incapacitated for up to 10 minutes. Fortuitously, such creative thoughts are usually confined to the political and psychological literature, as well as theoretical productions.
And theatrical production, because
Yeah.
Hollywood loves to show
Sure.
a guy getting the muscle control, and then he just lays around and flops like a fish forever, yeah.
Sure. Another thing you said in there, a 10-second TASER exposure compared to pepper spray or a heavy bag The TASER was the second lowest next to OC spray.
In terms of what markers, some metabolic stress or adrenergic
Correct.
stress?
So it was less than punching a heavy bag.
In terms of, I think it was metabolic stress in that case, lactate, pH, do you recall? But,
So
yeah,
that's
there
a
have been
fair
studies that have done of that.
Okay.
Punching a heavy bag can take somebody into anaerobic position, and it's very, very exhausting.
Sure. Once again, the CEW application including muscle contractions of less than half of voluntary weightlifting. Cannot be that stressful on the body. Less muscle effects than running 20 yards.
Okay?
That sounds like
Well,
something.
that
you
sounds
would
all right,
read.
yeah, sure.
Okay, you're okay with that. You have a February, I don't have the full one, but you did a specific study in 2019 on eye injuries from electrical weapon probes.
I could publish 2 papers around
Two?
that, 2018 and 2019.
I don't have the full ones, but kind of gleaning from that, in 2018, eye injuries from electrical weapons, 28 cases out of 3.44 million. Does that sound about right?
Yes.
It's a rare but real risk. That's a fair statement?
Yes?
A strike in the face is in 1% of TASER deployments. Smaller than that actually hit the eye.
Okay?
Is
I trust your reading.
Okay.
It's my paper.
And what you brought up, you found one case of stun damage, a drive stun to the eye that's caused any sort of damage. That's the one you testified to.
Is that one mentioned in my paper as well?
I don't have the full paper.
Okay.
I got the
Yeah.
summary, but then you just testified to it.
Sure, well, that's 2 different situations. This paper was focused on the ballistic damage from the probe going and rupturing the eyeball. So we were not looking for damage caused directly by electricity. That was reported separately.
All right. But I'm just trying to get the total number. So you've got 28 cases out of 3.44 million of a probe going in the eye, right?
Back then, yes.
And
That's
then you have
more.
this one incident of the drive stun causing eye damage.
One incident that comes to mind right now of something published in the medical and scientific literature. There's certainly more.
Now, you keep on writing. You've got you did civil rights and governmental tort liability, defending non-firearm arrest-related death litigation. Was this an article or was it a presentation?
That was an informal article that was part of the presentation at a legal conference January of last year.
Okay. And this one, you wrote, CEW reduced subject injury by 65% and 78% reduction in injury requiring medical attention. Is that a fair statement?
Well, I didn't do those studies. Those are studies sponsored by the National Institute of Justice.
But this is, I got this from, I mean, it's,
No, the numbers are correct.
I'm just saying, that's what I got from your article,
Yeah.
though.
No, those
Yeah, no
numbers are
problem.
correct. That's why these weapons are used by law enforcement all over the world.
Part of this article, hands-on physical force tends to triple the injury rates compared to the CEW. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, that's what the studies show.
Bottle muscle simulation, MIHA Body Tech. Is that a brand or something?
That's a muscle stimulator used for toning your body. You wear this whole suit and you stimulate every muscle in your body. It's the MIHA Body Tech used
MIHA.
by, it's
Okay.
got
But that
about $2,000 and that stimulates all those muscles.
Well, that's why I don't have one. But that delivers more than 4 times the current per electrode than a CEW. That's what you wrote. Does that
Yeah,
sound
they're
about
stimulating
right?
all the muscles hard for an exhausting free workout.
And this is 2024, and it says at this point in time in 2024, there are 30 deaths by fatal falls and head and neck injuries in flammable fumes. That's the primary way people are killed, right? Falls and fumes.
From electrical weapon, yes.
Okay.
Falls and fires, we like to say.
And I guess, going into that, none of that, because you just testified about this neck thing. Went through a bunch of articles. You didn't say anything about the neck, any neck injuries, anybody dying from getting tased in the neck or a drive stun in the neck.
It's correct, because that's no longer used.
Okay, it's no longer used, but it's still a risk, right? I mean, you would have paid attention if somebody would have died from that.
No, The thing, what we have to be careful to not confuse studies of, is this weapon safe to use to control a violent subject versus what are the risks of it being used on a police officer who has a firearm that can be used against them? That's really apples and oranges.
Well, but it's still something to consider, that you don't have any statistics, you don't have a single case you can show where somebody has died of getting drive stunned in the neck.
That's correct. That hasn't been allowed for almost 20 years.
I know it hasn't been allowed, but the taser's been out there. It's been, now it's up to, been used 7.5 million times, I think you said, right?
It's over 7 million worldwide.
So I would assume, I mean, you're the expert in this, you would be aware if that had happened.
Yeah, I think that would be an interesting, I would want to write that article, but the point is not that there was deaths from that, but it's a very real risk of incapacitation. So an officer would lose control of his firearm. That's the risk there. These studies are focused on what happens to subjects, resistant subjects, not what happens to the police officer.
Well, so your position then is, the real danger is an officer getting incapacitated and then somebody taking the weapon from him,
That's a primary danger, besides getting a probe in the eye.
besides getting the probe in the eye. Okay. So then we kind of come to the big study, if you will. Mr. Dodge mentioned it early. You have a study, 2021, police shootings after electrical weapon seizure, homicide or suicide by cop. That was your title.
Yes,
And in that study, not a single officer was killed.
that's correct.
Okay? I think you said there were 53 individuals who disarmed an officer of their taser.
But it's not clear if they were completely disarmed it, but they were trying, either succeeded or were attempting to gain control of
Okay.
the electrical weapon, and the officer then shot them.
So I'll stand corrected again. Authors report 131 incidents of subject attempting to or gaining control of an officer's electrical weapon from 2004 to 2020. 53 results in a shooting.
That's correct.
And all 53 that resulted in a shooting results in the person trying to disarm the officer, not the officer being killed.
And that's why it's taught that way.
Sure.
Because if the officer did not shoot that individual, they could have died. So that's what that study really shows, is that the training of you can transition to your firearm if this violent suspect takes control of the electric weapon, it works. So it's saving officer lives.
So even out of those 53 that were shot, only 14 were actually shocked, right? That actually got a stun, right?
That where the officer received a shock or
Correct.
just threatened, yes.
Okay. 18, nothing happened. They were disarmed with a taser and nothing happened. The wasn't pointed, didn't get tased, right?
I'm going to take your word for it, yes.
You want to take a look at the, you can get the article. That's,
I mean, I wrote it, I'm responsible for it.
Okay.
But I'm not sure what the question is.
well, so in more cases than not, when an officer's taser was taken from him, nothing happened.
Well, they got shot,
Well, after, but they didn't, officer didn't get tased, right?
and that's why they have the training. Someone takes your electrical weapon, you've got to avoid the risk, you
What-
transition to firearm.
What training are you talking about?
Well, I'm not going to go into specific, I don't know what the specific training is in Grand Rapids, but in general, that is the understanding across the country, that is an acceptable transition.
So you're in generally accepted police practices that somebody can take when somebody takes a taser, they can get shot? No matter the circumstances?
I don't hold myself out as an expert on police practices, certainly. But in our research for this paper, we surveyed all of the master instructors across the United States, and that is the impression I got. I don't recall putting statistics to it, and it's clearly demonstrated by what ended up happening here. Police
Okay.
officer used the firearm for defense and ended the situation, so they never did get shot.
But you don't go into the facts and circumstances of each case.
We did, actually. We went into some detail of those 53 shootings.
So in the 53 shootings, what were the circumstances? Like, there's more that goes into just taking an officer's taser, right?
Well, it's been 5 years since I wrote the paper, and it was 53 cases. I can't remember the details of every one as I sit here today.
But all you can remember is the impression that that was the policy, if you will, is just somebody takes your taser, they can be shot.
It's my impression that that is standard practice, that's accepted practice.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
That's
From
your
working
opinion.
in it, from studying this issue.
But you don't hold yourself out as a police expert, though, correct?
I didn't, and we did not survey what their practices were in their agency. We just know how it ended up. So we'll
All right.
leave it at that.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Just one more topic, Doctor. Many of these statistics, I think Mr. Childs, the prosecution's expert on TASER, talked about this too. Less lethal, millions. Marketed by a trained person, used as designed and intended. Is that fair to say?
Yes,
That's the majority of those statistics.
that's correct. Essentially, all of them. There are civilian weaker weapons sold, they're similar, but there's no statistics gathered on those.
And to the police officer, they're warned, this device is serious, may cause incapacitation or death.
That's correct. It's a weapon.
And that's why, based on your study, that this, whether training or just generally accepted, there's dangers to an officer if they have their taser taken from them.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Just a follow-up, but I think that the study ended in 2021, correct?
Well, we published in 2021, we stopped collecting data in 2020.
Are you aware of, since then, now we're now in 2025, are you aware that still never been a police officer killed after being disarmed with a taser?
Well, yes, and that speaks to the effectiveness of the policy.
You keep talking about a policy, you don't know anything about a police policy. Your impression of a police policy is not a policy, right?
Okay, I guess what I can say, that's a fair point.
Okay,
Well,
so
we
that's
could
your
fi-
impression.
but
You're
the
not-
im-
You
yeah,
gotta
that's-
stop. You don't know anything about police policies or practices. So all you know is, no officer has ever been killed in the history of the taser after being disarmed with a taser, correct?
And I don't mean to be flippant about this, but a good analogy that,
Then, don't need an analogy, just need a yes or a no answer.
Your Honor, could the witness try to answer one of these questions?
I asked a simple question. It was a yes or a no answer. He doesn't get to give, he wants to be flippant. Real easy answer.
it's, okay, it's not that flippant, but it's an analogy that's commonly used to describe this.
I think he answered the question, because I think you asked it again. But, I mean, I think it was a yes or no question, and it doesn't call for an analogy. I'm afraid of how far the analogy will go. So, I will overrule the objection.
But you think I've asked and answered it, so I'll stop.
Yeah, I do think that he answered it, and then he added more, and then you asked it again,
Okay.
so, which is kind of argumentative too, sir.
Can I just ask him one more question? What would you like to say on that point?
Sure, no.
Well, you could say, how do you know that you really need a parachute jumping out of an airplane? Because no one's jumped out of an airplane without a parachute, and we don't know if they would have died without the parachute. I mean, that's the kind of question you're asking but it's actually a good analogy, because how do you know if the officer had just stood there that they wouldn't have been disarmed? No, because they shot the suspect in self-defense. So, no, we don't know what would have happened.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
I do see one hand. So my clerk will come and grab that question. officer were shot and survived?
5.
Any follow-up from that?
No, thank you.
Mr. Becker?
No, Your Honor.
Don't see any other hands raised, may this witness be excused?
Yes.
Any objection?
No objection.
Thank you very much, sir, you are excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Now 4:30, I hope that's enough time to call another witness and get through it in the next 15 minutes. So what we'll do is we'll do a little bit early today. So I forgot to say at the last break, but please remember to turn your notes upside down. You did a great job last time. Leave them in your chairs. Also, please remember to not discuss the case with each other, with anyone else, and also